Good morning, dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by saying that I am significantly more nervous these days when I'm addressing any conference, and I want to confess my nervousness. Firstly, because, and I put in a story, addressing a group in the US a couple years ago, at the end of my speech, a very upset delegate put up a hand and said, "Kumi, have you heard of Martin Luther King?" And then I said, yes, he inspired many people in my country when we were fighting against apartheid. And then she asked, do you know what his most famous speech was called? Thinking it was a trick question, I very gently said, I have a dream. And she shouted back at me, yes, it was I have a dream, but when I hear you speak, it sounds like you have a bloody nightmare. The oceans are rising, the forests are disappearing, fascism is on the rise, and so on. So therein lies one of the key challenges of the moment of history that we find ourselves in. How do we, on the one hand, speak truth to power, not sanitize how deep a crisis humanity finds itself in, but on the other, how do we do that in a way that inspires action, does not demotivate, does not depress, does not immobilize, and spurs innovation, creativity, and courage. Now, before we go any further, I want to do a quick pop quiz with you and ask you this question. Where are we in terms of addressing the climate crisis today? I'll give you three options. Option one, okay, don't look too much at the screen, rather look at my hands, okay? Option one is no reason to panic. Our government and business leaders on the current performance will get their act together and will secure our children and their children's future. Option two, that we are in a deep, deep crisis and we have every reason to be concerned, and the window of opportunity is fast closing, but human creativity, ingenuity, and innovation can broaden the window and take us away from the suicidal trajectory that humanity currently is on. And option three, if you would permit me, I will just say this in Afrikaans, which is a language from South Africa derived from Dutch, but I think you'll get the translation. Option three can be said, ons is deep, deep, deep in the kak. Okay, I hope that didn't require translation. So, how many of you think it's option one? Nobody? That's very sad. Option two? Okay, look around to see how people are voting. And option three? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now you know one of the reasons people don't vote for option three, because I was at a conference when I did this and the president of an organization said, I looked at all my staff who voted for option three and they're all going to be fired when we get back tomorrow, okay? So there are days when one wakes up, for me personally, it's option two. The day Donald Trump got elected, it certainly was option three. And so the challenge that we have right now is how do we maintain optimism at a moment when things appear to be falling apart. Now bear in mind, in 2015, people in the global south were already chanting 1.5 to stay alive, right? In June. 6 months later, the climate negotiations, the slogan had changed to 1.5, we might survive, okay? So I want to ask you, how many of you, just shout out, know where we are towards the 1.5 and keeping it below 1.5? Anybody? We are already there. So if we're already there, and if the science has told us for decades that we have to keep it between 1.5, why are we not all pulling out our hair and panicking and saying, listen, it cannot be business as usual. We have to do something that is additional to where we find ourselves. So let me just start by saying that in this moment of history where we find ourselves in, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford. And the pessimism that justifiably emerges from our analysis, our observations, and our lived experiences can, must, and should be responded to by the optimism of our thought, our action, our creativity, our courage, and our innovation. So one of the things we seem to be in denial about is what is the key driver of climate change. So some of you might contest the 86% that I got up there, because some people say it's 75%, but basically it's between 75 and 86% of what's driving climate change is our addiction to oil, coal, and gas. So imagine you come home from work one day, you find the bath is overflowed and it's all over the floor. You pick up the mop because it's on your way to where the bathroom is. Do you start mopping the floor first, or do you go and turn off the tap first? Of course we go and turn off the tap. But for the last 30 years, since we've understood that climate is a crisis that very much challenges the capability of humanity to survive on this planet, what we've been doing is trying to wipe the floor without turning off the tap. We cannot get a safe, durable solution to the climate crisis if we don't prioritize stopping of what is 85% of the problem of climate change, which is getting off fossil fuels on the fastest timeline possible. So what is the Fossil Fuel Treaty? This is an initiative that is trying to do three things. One is to get nations together and to get them to agree to no new fresh investments in fossil fuels. The second is to then get nations to negotiate the fastest possible phase out from fossil fuels. And thirdly, it is to do it in the most fair, just, equitable, and inclusive manner. This, of course, includes ensuring a just transition that takes care not just of the workers in the fossil fuel industry, but also the communities that depend on fossil fuel infrastructure. Now, the good news is there are 16 countries that have already endorsed this effort, including 2 fossil fuel exporting countries, Colombia and Timor-Leste. And we are using the example. And the reason we need to do this is because for decades, when we've been going to the COP, I remember in Copenhagen in 2009, we went there and we said we wanted a fab deal. Not a fabulous deal, but a fair, ambitious, and binding deal. But year in, year out, what we get is a flab deal, F-L-A-B, full of loopholes and bullshit. Sorry, I think I'm one slide behind. So basically, of course, we need the climate negotiations to continue, but we must be very real that we need something additional to it, because year in, year out, we are not getting the kind of results we need to get out of the climate negotiations. So think about it. It took us 28 years of negotiation before the root cause of climate change is even mentioned in a COP outcome document. That's like Alcoholics Anonymous holding 28 years of conferences, right? And it takes them 28 years before they can mention alcohol in the outcome document. And the reason for that, of course, is that the largest delegation to the climate negotiations annually is the fossil fuel industry. And that's as bizarre as Alcoholics Anonymous holding a big global conference every year, and the largest delegation to the conference is the alcohol industry. So, is this realistic? Yes, it is. We have had moments in history where we needed a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, where we needed a landmine treaty and so on, that nations came together and did it. The fossil fuel treaty is driven by a strategy that's similar to the landmine treaty, where it was negotiated by 44 nations outside of the the UN system, and then brought into the UN system and ratified. And we are confident that next year we should be able to move towards negotiations and start the negotiations so that we begin to move countries in that direction. And Just as the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner in the 80s, the tagline was, if you build it, they will come. And once the negotiations start, you can be rest assured that countries will participate. But the things that we need to do to move forward. One of the problems is we've been treating climate change as a sectoral issue, and we need to treat it in a much more intersectional way. We cannot treat climate change as an environmental issue. We need to understand that it's a failure of our economic system, our food system, our energy system, and so on. And we need to turbocharge intersectionality in our approaches. Thirdly, the way we've been communicating, we have not been addressing the deficits of reaching out people. To a large extent, most of our narratives have been aimed at the brain, and we've ignored the heart, the body, and the soul. And we have to start talking about climate change in a much more people-centric way, where it's about jobs, about food, it's about transport, it's about water, and so on. The other thing that we need to do is recognize that arts and culture is how we need to be able to reach ordinary people. And sadly, if we look at the forces of fascism, they seem to be able to better understand this than many of us do. So one of our partners from the Pacific, This Is Our Home, is one of the most powerful communicators of the climate message today, being on stages with Coldplay and so on, and reaching hundreds of thousands of people, rather than keeping our conversation with such a small number of people that it's been over the last 30 years. To move this forward, we also need to address the question of finance, and one of the things that the climate that we are doing in the Fossil Fuel Treaty is moving to set up a Just Economies Forever Fund, we call it, which is to make sure that countries like Colombia, who are stepping forward and saying we want to make the transition away from fossil fuels, how do we help them develop financing possibilities that will help them develop ecotourism, sustainable agriculture, and so on. They have, in Colombia's case, $40 billion of shovel-ready plans which they are wanting to attract investment. Not grant funding, but proper investment. But the main thing we have to do is recognize that we have to create possibilities for ordinary people to participate. And the second reason why I'm nervous, if I go back to where I started, is just before I came in here, I read what Tony Blair has just said. I don't know how many of you, a show of hands, how many of you read what Tony Blair said? Let me just say it in one sentence. Tony Blair is as wrong on what he just said, and is behind where the UK people are. Basically says the UK people don't get it, even though we heard that 81% of the people support climate action. He's just as wrong as he's on this as he was when he accused Iraq of having nuclear weapons, and the devastation that was caused to the people of Iraq and the Middle East, tragic as it was. Him taking positions like this is going to be even more catastrophic. So he cannot address the question of climate change with false solutions and untested solutions. To say that you put all your eggs in a carbon capture and storage basket when that technology has not shown its capability to deliver on scale is irresponsible, reckless, and criminal. So one of the things we have to do in moving forward right now is also recognize that climate change today constitutes a massive global mental health crisis. We have massive levels of climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, and so on. And if we are to be able to address the challenge that we find, we have to create multiple ways in which people can participate. So I want to end with this message to you, that the struggle for justice, social justice, economic justice, climate justice, these struggles are sprints and not marathons. So to each and every one of you that is here today, I want to thank you for all the innovation that I've walked around and seen that you are engaged in, encourage you to take that to a different level. However, Good as all the innovation might be, if we don't turn off the tap of fossil fuels, we are kidding ourselves that we are getting a durable and final solution to address climate change. So I say to you, the struggle for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. Be strong. There are going to be many, many days where we're going to see setbacks, but just recognize that the world we live in would be a much more depressing place were it not for the work that each of you do and in the broader community of people that are addressing climate change. And keep your energy, keep your optimism, keep your perseverance, because this is not simply about saving the planet. I want to tell you in conclusion, the planet is just fine. The planet does not need saving, because if we continue on this suicidal path that we are on, we burn up, we destroy our water resources, we destroy our soil resources, we warm up the planet where we cannot grow food. The end result is we will be gone, the planet will still be here. And the good news is, once we become extinct as a species, the oceans will recover, the forests will replenish, and so on. So please understand that the challenge to avert catastrophic climate change is nothing more and nothing less than protecting our children and their children's futures. And in every culture, in every religion, in every part of the world, that unites us in our care for our children. So I ask you, in conclusion, to support the Fossil Fuel Treaty, to get involved in sustainable solutions and mobilize the courage and the resilience that we need to ensure that we stay the course. Thank you very much.